The Prague Affair. Chapter 1. The first thing Elias Mercer noticed about Prague was the sound. Not the bells, though they were everywhere, or the tram cables humming over cobblestone streets, but the language itself, rising and falling around him in a music he had studied for years, but never truly lived inside. Czech vowels slipped and clustered in the cold air of October. Consonants clicked like beads, and he found himself slowing his steps just to listen as he wheeled his small suitcase up from the metro, heart pounding more with anticipation than with exertion. Sabbatical, he reminded himself. A year away from his campus office, from the stacks of grading, from the creeping fear that his work on suppressed literature in Central Europe had already passed its moment. A year to be in the city where the words he loved had once been dangerous. He found his rented flat on a tree-lined street in Vinohrady, 3 floors up in a building with high ceilings and a faint smell of boiled cabbage and dust. The landlord, a retired engineer with kind eyes, pressed a jangling set of keys into his hand and explained the temperamental boiler in brisk English, then switched into Czech to warn him about the grocer downstairs who watered the milk. Elias followed as best he could, nodding at the right moments, grateful to feel his brain stretch back into the language. When the door finally closed behind him, he set his suitcase by the wardrobe, crossed to the window, and looked out. The city rolled downward in layers of red roofs and spires until the silhouette of the castle cut a dark line against the grey sky. Somewhere under those roofs, he knew, lay the old theatres, the samizdat archives, the cafés where plays and poems had been whispered like contraband. Somewhere under those roofs, the ghosts of censors and informants still moved in people's memories. This, he thought, is why I came. That night, he ate alone in a smoky pub, the menu smudged, the waiter impatient with his careful check. He ordered goulash and beer, listened to the conversations around him, snatches of politics, football, some older men reminiscing about za komunistu under the communists. The phrase pricked his ears. It always did. When he stepped out into the cold, the street was washed orange by sodium lamps, the city's stone soaked in centuries of weather. On a worn lamppost near the tram stop, he saw it, a bright poster half covered by band flyers and lost dog notices. The title leaped out at him in bold black letters, Horici Mapa, the burning map. Below, in smaller text, an English tagline, a play once banned by the regime, 1 week only, Underground Theatre Vltava. He read the Czech description twice, pulse quickening. A revival of a play banned in 1979, rumoured to have disappeared with its playwright. Dissident theatre, surveillance, betrayal. It was exactly the kind of text his research chased through archives. Then he saw the date scrawled by hand in thick marker. Rehearsal, open to public. Tomorrow, 1800 hours. He hesitated only a moment before taking out his phone and snapping a picture. He told himself it was for work, for context, for something to frame his year here. He did not know, standing beneath that lamppost in the draft of a passing tram, that the poster was also a door. Chapter 2. The Underground Theatre. Vltava turned out to be neither underground nor near the Vltava. It was in a former textile warehouse in Holesovice, half gentrified now into galleries and cafés, but still retaining the drafty bones of industry. Elias arrived early, breath-fogging, scarf wound tight, and pushed through a metal door marked only with a small paper sign. Inside smelled of sawdust, old paint, and coffee. The stage was just a raised platform with black curtains, the seats a mismatched collection of chairs. A cluster of actors stood in a semicircle, scripts in hand. A man in his 60s with a silver ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses paced in front of them, gesturing with a pencil as he spoke rapid Czech about rhythm, truth, and not being afraid of silence. Elias lingered at the back, unsure if anyone would question his presence. No one did, beyond a quick glance from a young woman with a headset who seemed to be directing the chaos of props and lighting. The actors began to read, their voices filling the cavernous space. The opening scene was simple enough. A man in an apartment, arguing with a shadowy visitor. On the surface, it was about a landlord demanding rent. Beneath it, the subtext was thick: state power, moral compromise, surveillance. Elias heard the coded exchanges in the pauses. The way one character said neighbor and meant informer. The way another talked about repairs and clearly meant interrogations. This, he knew, was the language of the censored theatre, where meaning had to slip sideways to survive. Then she spoke. The actress was standing slightly apart from the others, script closed in her hand, as if she already knew the lines by heart. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dark hair swept back away from a pale, expressive face. When she stepped into the scene, her presence altered the air. Her first line was a simple question. "Coach Zait, what do you want?" But she delivered it as if it was addressed not just to the other actor, but to every absent power looming over the stage. Her voice was low, steady, edged with a defiant humor. The director stopped pacing and watched her with a half-smile, as if he had been waiting for that moment. Elias realized he was holding his breath. The rehearsal moved on. There were scenes of cramped kitchens and crowded trams, whispered bargains and loud silences. Some parts felt rough, others startlingly sharp. The woman, he heard someone call her Clara, was at the center of the strongest scenes, her character a theater actress whose husband had been arrested, her art both her weapon and her liability. When the actors broke for coffee, the silver-haired director finally noticed the stranger at the back. He walked over with a curious squint. "You're early for the premiere," he said in Czech. His accent was Prague city centre, vowels slightly flattened. "I saw your poster," Elias answered, thankful his tongue didn't tangle. "You said the rehearsal was open to the public." "Technically," the man conceded, then smiled. "I am Jaroslav Dolezal, director, and you are—" "Elias Mercer. I'm here on sabbatical from the States. I teach comparative linguistics. I work on dissident literature, especially coded texts in—" He stopped himself, aware he was already sounding like a grant proposal. Yaroslav's eyes brightened. "Coded texts? Then you came to the right rehearsal by accident, pan professore. Or maybe not accident." He glanced toward the script in his hand, worn at the edges. "This play is full of ghosts and secrets. My mentor wrote it. They never forgave him." "The author is Pavel Hruby?" Elias asked, heart ticking up. The name was obscure even in his field, mentioned in footnotes and rumors, always with a question mark by his fate. "I thought the manuscript was lost." "So did the police," Jaroslav said dryly. "They forgot that theater people remember with their bodies. We rebuilt it after the revolution, every line, but there are still things in it we don't understand. Patterns, oddities. If you are not too bored by actors and their endless problems, perhaps you could come by another time, look at the text. I like having skeptics in the room." "I'd like that very much," Elias said. "Good." Yaroslav clapped him on the shoulder with surprising strength. "Then come. I will introduce you to our star before she disappears into the dressing room and becomes intolerable." He led Elias toward the coffee table. Clara was there, leaning against a wall scribbled with graffiti from previous productions. Dates, quotes, small drawings of masks. Up close, her face was even more striking, not in a polished way, but in the way it shifted quickly. Eyes narrowing, mouth curling, like a landscape under fast-moving clouds. She wore a faded sweater, jeans, her ankles bare in old leather boots. "Claro," Yaroslav said. "This is Professor Mercer from America, specialist in coded texts, a man who came to our rehearsal on purpose. Try not to scare him away." "I scare only people who deserve it," she said, though her mouth twitched with amusement. She extended her hand. "Dobry den, pan professore." "Prosim, Elias," he said, taking it. Her handshake was firm, warm. "And your Czech is good," she added, studying him. "Dangerously so. People will assume you understand everything and stop explaining the jokes. That's my goal," he said. "Understanding the jokes." "Then you chose the right city and the wrong profession," she replied. "What do you want with our old forbidden play?" Elias hesitated, aware that the answer mattered. "I study how language hides meaning," he said. "How people write one thing and mean another. This play, its history, the way it was banned, it suggests that there might be more in the text than meets the eye." For a moment, something in her expression sharpened. She glanced at Jaroslav, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Some of us think so too," she said quietly, "or fear so. We're not sure which. Come tomorrow, Yaroslav said briskly, as if to cut off the heaviness. We will be working on Act 2. That's where the real trouble starts. In the play? Elias asked. Yaroslav laughed. In the play, always in the play. In life, trouble started long ago. Clara sipped her coffee and looked at Elias over the rim of the paper cup. You came here to read our secrets, she said. I hope you are prepared for the fact that sometimes the text reads you back. He had no answer ready for that. He only knew that when he left the theatre, the city felt different, less like a backdrop and more like a page he'd begun to read, full of cramped, urgent handwriting. Chapter 3. The next weeks arranged themselves around rehearsals. Elias told himself he was structuring his research schedule. The truth was that the theatre tugged at him. He spent mornings in the library of the Institute of Czech Literature, combing through yellowed samizdat magazines, and afternoons in the dim warehouse, listening to actors argue with Yaroslav about motivation and honesty while they recited lines that had once been considered crimes. In the evenings, he typed notes in his small apartment, the radiator knocking like a persistent neighbor. Yaroslav lent him a copy of the script, its pages creased and annotated in multiple hands. The title page bore the name The Burning Map, and underneath in faded blue ink, Pavel Hruby, 1979. Someone had drawn a small compass rose in one corner. The play's structure was deceptively simple. 3 acts, 1 apartment, a handful of characters, an actress, her husband, a neighbor, a series of visitors. But as Elias read and reread, something nagged at him. The dialogue was studded with peculiar repetitions. Certain phrases appeared in seemingly unrelated scenes. The door that does not close, the spoon that bends, the window with one blind eye. The pattern wasn't naturalistic. It wasn't a verbal tick. It felt deliberate. The cues for stage directions were oddly specific in some places, vague in others. On page 27, a character was instructed to stand at an angle of 37 degrees from the table, a precision that made no sense in staging. On page 41, a pause was described as long enough to boil an egg, short enough to swallow a lie. Elias's mind pricked with professional excitement. Codes often hid in the excessive, in the unnecessary detail. The problem, as always, was to distinguish true signal from artistic eccentricity. One late afternoon, as rain ticked against the high windows of the warehouse, he sat in the back row, scribbling in his notebook while the cast blocked Act 2. On stage, Clara was in the middle of a scene where her character, Hana, practiced a monologue for an imaginary audience while her husband listened behind a closed door. The monologue was about losing one's way in a city full of identical streets, but the language was dense with metaphors of maps, rivers, erased names. You can't play it like a metaphor, Yaroslav called from the dark. For you, it's literal. You are talking about actual streets you walked, actual names you watched disappear. But they are metaphors, Clara argued, turning toward him. Hana knows that. She is playing with it. She is, but the audience does not need to see her wink at the metaphor. They need to believe she is lost. Later, they will understand the rest. Elias watched them argue, language itself the subject of the tug-of-war. He felt something shift inside him when Clara turned back to the imaginary audience and began again, this time letting the words fall without adornment. The room chilled as if a door to winter had opened. He knew the monologue by now. He could almost recite it. Still, a line near the end stumbled differently in his ear. If you burn the map, the city reorganizes itself around the ashes. Burn the map. He underlined it in his script, then circled every place the word map appeared. There were 9. 9, he thought. 3 by 3. His brain catalogued the pattern instinctively. After rehearsal, as people began to leave, he stayed behind, flipping pages. He didn't notice Clara until she sat down beside him, her shoulder almost touching his. Her hair was damp near her temples. She'd run her hands through it after pulling off a wig. Up close, he saw faint lines at the corners of her eyes, not from age so much as from a life of squinting at bright lights. You look like a man trying to solve a crossword puzzle in a language he doesn't quite speak, she said. It feels more like a crossword that keeps changing clues when I'm not looking, he said. This play, it's more tightly patterned than I expected. The repetitions, the strange directions. I can't tell yet if it's just Hruby's style or... Or if he hid something, she finished. Yaroslav hinted at that once. When he was drunk enough to feel brave, but not so drunk, he forgot his fear. He said there were rumors that the play contained a list, names, evidence, something that would ruin people if it came out, but he never explains further. Maybe he doesn't know, or maybe he knows too well. If there is? Something embedded, Elias said slowly. It would have been constructed under incredible risk. It would need to be robust enough to survive copying and performance, but subtle enough to evade censors. A code woven into the dialogue, into the stage directions, into the structure. That's not impossible. People did crazier things then, she said. They baptized their children secretly and wrote whole philosophies in the margins of cookbooks. My parents still whisper if someone knocks on the door unexpectedly. They don't even realize it. Do you remember it? He asked. Communism? She tilted her head, considering. I was 8 when the Velvet Revolution happened. I remember holding my father's hand in Wenceslas Square, the crowd clapping, the keys ringing like hundreds of quiet bells. I remember the smell of wet wool and cigarette smoke, and someone hoisting me up onto their shoulders so I could see the balcony. And I remember, more than the politics, my mother crying, not from sadness, from unclenching. She shrugged. I was too young to understand the fear, but old enough to absorb it like smoke in my clothes. Sometimes it still smells like that in the right kind of dark. He looked at her, at the tired grace of her face, the defiant line of her jaw. Why did you want this role? He asked. She smiled, a quick, crooked thing. Because Hana is an actress who uses her work as a weapon and then discovers the blade cuts both ways. Because she is brave and selfish and afraid and still steps on stage. Because my friends told me I was too old and too tired to play a revolutionary trapped in a one-room apartment, and I wanted to prove them wrong. Her eyes softened. And because my father saw the original rehearsal before the censors shut it down. He used to talk about it like a ghost that haunted him. He would have loved to see this. Is he? Elias began. Dead, she said, not unkindly. Car accident 10 years ago. He saw the regime fall, at least. He saw his friends come home from prison. He didn't see them turn into cynical bastards afterward, so he was spared that disappointment. Elias thought of his own father, a quiet accountant in Ohio who had never left the States, who didn't understand why his son spent his life chasing obscure texts in languages no one around them spoke. My father doesn't talk much about anything, he said. Sometimes I wonder what ghosts he never named. Everyone has ghosts, Clara said. Only some of us have the bad taste to put them on stage. She reached over and took the script gently from his hand, flipping to a page near the end. Here, she said, tapping a paragraph of stage directions. This always bothered me. It's fussy in a way the rest isn't. He read. The actress crosses the room in 7 steps, touching the chair, the mirror, the window, the door, the lamp, the table, the door again. Each touch is deliberate, as if counting. 7 steps, he murmured. 7 objects, but the door is twice. Why count twice? Exactly, she said. We tried staging it literally, but it looks ridiculous. We ended up playing it as emotional beats instead. Sometimes codes hide in counts and sequences, he said. If I map the repetitions, look at which words reoccur, where the unusual syntax is. There might be a pattern, or it might be coincidence. Either way, it's worth looking. Be careful, she said softly. In this country, finding patterns in old texts has a way of waking up people who wish the past would stay buried. He met her gaze. The past doesn't stay buried just because people close their eyes. She smiled again, but there was no humor in it. Spoken like a man who has not yet had the past knock on his door at midnight. The lights in the warehouse flicked off, leaving them in dim, emergency glow. Someone called a goodbye. They walked out together into the rain, their breath making small clouds. At the tram stop, they hesitated. Do you live far? He asked. In Zizkov, she said. Too many bars, not enough parking. The usual. You? Vinoradi, a few stops. Then we are neighbors of a sort, she said. How very inconvenient. Inconvenient? For my schedule, she said lightly. Now Jaroslav will expect me to rehearse with you in cafés. Actors don't do mornings, you know. I can bribe you with coffee, he said. And perhaps some insight into cross-linguistic steganography, she laughed. You say the most romantic things, pan professore. The tram arrived, its doors hissing open. As they stepped on and the city slid by outside, Elias felt it, a small shift, like the first click of a safe's tumblers aligning. Chapter 4. The affair did not begin with a kiss. It began with a notebook. A few days later they met at Café Slavia, that famous haunt of poets and dissidents opposite the National Theatre. The windows looked out over the river, the castle a grey silhouette beyond. The walls were lined with mirrors that doubled the smoke and the quiet intensity of conversations. It was mid-morning, so the crowd was mostly students and older men reading newspapers. Elias spread the script on the table between them, his notebook open, pages covered in neat columns of Czech phrases, arrows, numbers. Clara watched him with amused exasperation. "You really did all this in 2 days?" she said. "Obsession is an underrated research skill," he replied. "Look here." He tapped a page. Every time the word map appears, it's within 3 lines of either the word door or window. Also, the characters refer to directions, north, south, east, west, in a way that doesn't match the physical layout of the apartment described. Maybe Ruby was just bad at spatial reasoning, she suggested. Possibly. But then there are the stage directions. The one you showed me about the 7 steps, the repeated touches. I started mapping those onto the dialogue, seeing if they correspond to letters or numbers when taken in sequence. And so far what emerges is noise, he admitted, which might mean there is no code, or it might mean I haven't found the right key. But there is one thing that stands out. He flipped to the end of Act 3. This monologue, Hannah's final speech, it's stylistically different from the rest of the play. The syntax is more formal, the vocabulary more archaic. It reads like something spliced in. Clara leaned forward, scanning the text. "I've felt that too," she said. "It's like suddenly I'm speaking in someone else's voice. We thought maybe it was just Ruby being poetic at the end, or that he wrote it during a different draft." "Possibly," Elias said. "But if you take the first letter of every line of the monologue in Czech, you get this." He turned the notebook so she could see the column of letters. M-K-O-L-A-R. M-K-O-L-A-R, she read. M-Kolar. That could be a name. There are 1 million Kolars in this country, though. Yes, but why hide one here? It could be coincidence. Acrostics happen unintentionally, but given the context and the rumors of names hidden in the play, he let the sentence trail off. "Maybe it's the name of someone he loved," she said, half teasing. "A secret admirer's signature. Or someone he feared," Elias countered. "A betrayer, a contact." She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the swirl of foam. "My father once told me that Ruby disappeared into custody and never came out," she said. "No trial, no funeral, just gone. People whispered that he had been planning to stage this play in a way that would expose certain officials, but the STB got to him first." "STB?" Elias asked, though he knew the answer. "State security," she said. "The secret police, the ones who knew everyone's secrets and kept their own. After the revolution, some of their files were opened. People saw who had collaborated, who had informed on whom. Families broke apart, friendships ended. My parents were terrified their names would show up, even though they'd done nothing. In the end, it was some neighbor down the hall who had reported on my father's stupid jokes. A trivial betrayal, but it poisoned the air in the building for years. If Ruby embedded names in the play," Elias said, "it might have been an insurance policy, a way to ensure that if he were arrested, the truth would eventually come out, if someone decoded it and made it public. Unless the people named got to the code first," she said, "then it becomes leverage, or a reason to kill." It was said lightly, but the word hung between them. Kill. Elias looked around the cafe, at the windows, at the students hunched over laptops, at the tourists snapping photos of the retro interior. It seemed absurd to imagine murder plotted in such a place. And yet he'd spent enough time in archives to know that terror often wore ordinary wallpaper. "So what do we do, Professor?" Clara asked. "Assuming your Monsieur Collard is not just a coincidence, how do we find him? Check the phone book?" "We start small," he said. "I can look into archival databases, see if there was an STB officer or informant with that name connected to theater circles. The Institute might have records. Yaroslav might remember something, though I suspect he's telling us only as much as he thinks we can handle. Yaroslav remembers everything and admits nothing, she said with fond irritation. He was young then, but not that young. He survived by bending just enough not to break. That sort of flexibility leaves scars. And you? He asked. How did you survive what came after? This transition, this half-life between systems? She raised an eyebrow. You say that as if I am 90. I was a child when the transition happened. I survived by learning to read the room before I could read the books. New systems, same men in suits, my father said, just different colors on the flags. He was more cynical than he pretended. She paused. I became an actress because I wanted to say dangerous things in a safer way. At least that's what I tell myself. The truth is, I like the applause too much. Honesty and narcissism, he said. A winning combination. It keeps me employed, she said. Usually. She put down her cup and looked at him, really looked as if deciding something. What about you, Elias? Why did you really come here? Sabbatical is a thin excuse. Most professors I know spend theirs in summer houses writing books no one will read. He hesitated. The real answer was not one he often shared. My marriage ended last year, he said finally. Or dissolved. It's hard to pick the right verb. My wife and I grew around each other like trees seeking different light. By the time we realized it was easier to cut than to prune, my department chair suggested I take some time away. Prague was the place that made the most sense professionally. And he glanced out at the river, at the ghost of the castle. And some part of me thought that if I came to a city that has reinvented itself so many times, maybe I could figure out how to do the same. So you came to learn resilience from the cobblestones, she said, not unkindly. Something like that. Does it work? I've been here 2 weeks, he said. I'm still at the listening stage. Listening is dangerous, she said. You might hear something you can't unhear. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not just attraction, though that was there, but recognition. Two people aware of their own fractures, curious about the shape of the others. This Monsieur Collard, she said, breaking the moment gently. If we find him, what then? Then we decide whether the past he represents belongs on stage, Elias said, or in a courtroom, or in a grave. You sound as if you think we'll have a choice, she murmured. We always have a choice, he said. That, she said, is the most American thing you've said all week. The waitress came with more coffee. Outside, the light shifted as clouds moved over the river. Later, when Elias would try to pinpoint the moment when what they were doing tipped from professional collaboration into something else, he would think of that second cup of coffee, of her fingers brushing his as she moved the script, of the way they both stayed long past the time they'd said they needed to be elsewhere. He would think of how, when they finally rose to leave, the space between them felt charged, like the pause before a line that changes a scene. Chapter 5. The kiss came on a bridge. Not Charles Bridge, because even in October it was too crowded with tourists and buskers and the ghosts of 1,000 Instagram posts. They chose instead a smaller span up the river, where the Vltava narrowed and the wind blew sharper. They had left a rehearsal late, the air brittle with impending frost, their breath visible. Jaroslav had dismissed them with a wave after a particularly intense run of Act 3, his voice hoarse from shouting about truth and betrayal. You were vicious tonight, Elias said as they walked. That scene where Hannah confronts the neighbor, you nearly set the stage on fire. That's why they pay me nothing, she said. Cheap special effects. But he could see the adrenaline still in her, the twitch of her fingers, the quickness of her steps. Acting, he was learning, was a physical risk as much as an emotional one. They reached the bridge and stopped, leaning against the railing. The river below was a dark, moving surface, dotted with reflections of streetlights. The castle loomed to their left, a black cutout against the sky. Somewhere far off, a tram bell rang. So, she said, what did you find at the Institute today? Any murderous Kolars in the records? Nothing conclusive, he admitted. There are references to a Milan Kolar in some STB files associated with the cultural scene, but the documents are partially redacted. Access requires special permission that may take weeks, and even then we don't know if he's our Emza Kolar. Our, she repeated softly. Listen to you. Already we are conspirators. That seems to be the default state here, he said. History conspires with itself. You say that like a romantic, she said. Most Czechs I know say it like a curse. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. On impulse, he reached to tuck it behind her ear. His fingers brushed the curve of her jaw, the shell of her ear, and she went very still. It surprised him, the intimacy of that small gesture. It was nothing, and it was everything. Elias, she said, his name a warning and a question. I'm sorry, he said, dropping his hand. I didn't mean to. You did, she said. The question is what you meant, he swallowed. I don't know yet, he said. That's the problem. You're separated, she said, not divorced. We're filing, he said. It's complicated. Of course it is, she said. People are. And I am not exactly a blank page either. She looked back at the water, jaw tight. I have an ex-husband who still works in the same industry and thinks every role I get is a personal insult. I have a mother who calls every Sunday to ask when I will give her grandchildren in a country where I can barely afford the rent. My life is a comedy that plays like a tragedy. We don't have to, he began. Stop, she said. You are a linguist. You know that sometimes the only honest thing is to choose the right words. So, here. I like you. Too much, probably. You make my brain spark. You also look at me like I'm not made entirely of my past mistakes. That is rare. At the same time, I am not looking for a professor-shaped complication in my already dramatic life. I don't want to be a complication, he said quietly. I just want to kiss me, she said. He met her gaze. Yes, he said. I do. She studied him for a long moment. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him first. It was not a tentative kiss. It was precise, like a line delivered on opening night, full of intention. Her mouth was warm against his in the cold air, her hand coming up to cup the back of his neck, pulling him closer. The river, the castle, the city blurred around the point of contact. He tasted coffee and cigarettes and something uniquely her. The part of his brain that catalogued language shut up for once. When they broke apart, both breathing a little faster, she rested her forehead against his. There, she said, now the complication is mutual. He laughed, a short, surprised sound. I suppose it is. Don't look so worried, she said. We are adults. We can handle a little mess. Besides, if the STB couldn't stop people from falling in love, what chance do our neuroses have? Did you just compare our potential relationship problems to an authoritarian regime? He asked. I compare everything to an authoritarian regime, she said. It keeps things in perspective. The second kiss was slower, exploratory. The third had to wait until they reached the relative privacy of his apartment, where the radiator clanged and the city's lights made faint shapes on the ceiling. Their bodies found each other with the kind of urgency that comes not just from desire, but from the awareness of time lost and time borrowed. It was not perfect. They fumbled, laughed, stopped to talk about boundaries and past wounds. He told her about the quiet implosion of his marriage, the way routine had become absence, how he'd woken up one day and realized he was living next to a stranger he still cared for, but no longer knew how to love. She told him about her ex-husband, a director who had loved her talent and then resented it, who had spoken to her through notes and reviews rather than direct honesty. They acknowledged that whatever this was, it was starting in the middle of their lives, not at some clean beginning. Later, as they lay tangled in wrinkled sheets, the window cracked open to the cold. She traced a line on his chest with her finger. Do you always throw yourself into codes and affairs with this much intensity? She asked. Only when the text is particularly compelling, he murmured. She snorted. Flattery will get you nowhere, pan professore. Evidence will. Then I will bring you evidence, he said, about the code, and about the fact that I'm not running away from something by being here, or at least not only running away. Everyone is always running away from something, she said. The trick is to figure out what you're running toward. He fell asleep later to the sound of her breathing, the distant clatter of trams and the faint whisper of Czech phrases in his head, rearranging themselves into patterns he had not yet deciphered. Chapter 6. The first overt threat came in red paint. It appeared on the exterior wall of the theatre one raw November morning as actors arrived for rehearsal, wrapped in scarves and grumbling about the cold. The word was big, all caps, slashed across the grey brick. Zrada. Treason. Below it, smaller, another word. MLCTE. Be silent. Elias saw it as he rounded the corner with Clara, their shoulders brushing. She stopped so abruptly he nearly walked into her. "Well," she said after a moment, "subtlety is not dead." Jaroslav arrived seconds later, his face draining of color when he saw the wall. "Idiots," he breathed. "Adolescent idiots with spray cans and no sense of history." "Are you sure?" Clara asked. "This feels a little more targeted than teenage vandalism." She pointed to the smaller word. "That's a warning, not a joke." A few other actors gathered, murmuring, pulling out phones to snap pictures. The stage manager, Petra, swore under her breath and went inside to find cleaning supplies. "We should call the police," one of the younger actors said. "And tell them what?" Yaroslav scoffed. "That someone wrote a bad word on our wall. They will file it under graffiti and forget about it." "But combined with the emails," Petra said, re-emerging with a bucket. She glanced at Elias apologetically. "Sorry, Professor. We've been getting some anonymous messages, nasty stuff about traitors and whores and people playing with fire. We thought it was just internet garbage." "Maybe it is," Jaroslav said. "There are always trolls when you dig into the past. They crawl out of the woodwork to defend their precious lies. We will paint over it and move on. Or we could take it as a sign that someone is paying attention," Clara said. "Someone with enough anger to pick up a can of paint at 7 in the morning." Elias stepped closer to the wall, examining the letters. The paint was still tacky. The lines were shaky in places, as if the writer's hand had trembled or the cold had stiffened their fingers. "Who knows about the rumors of a code in the play?" he asked quietly. "Within the company," Jaroslav said. "All of us. I may be old, but I'm not foolish enough to keep secrets from my actors. Outside, some old friends, some donors, possibly the journalist who interviewed me last week. And the archives," Elias added. "I've asked for files related to Hruby and his circle. If there's someone in the bureaucracy who still feels protective of certain histories." "You think someone in the archive used a spray can," Petra said skeptically. "Stranger things have happened," he said. "But no. More likely the archive request triggered a notification somewhere. Someone has access to both records and people who don't like this play coming back into the light." "Paranoia is our national pastime," Jaroslav muttered. "Let's not indulge it before noon." Still, he looked rattled. They decided to photograph the graffiti thoroughly before scrubbing it. Petra grumbled about the time lost. The younger actors made dark jokes. Clara was quiet, her jaw set. As she helped Petra attack the wall with chemical cleaner, red streaks running like blood in the rain, she said, "My father used to say that when someone tells you to be silent, it means you are finally saying something worth hearing." "Your father was a troublemaker," Petra said. "Yes," Clara said, "and they broke his nose twice for it." Elias spent the afternoon at the institute, his mind half on the files, half on the wall. The archivist he'd been working with, a thin man named Marek with nicotine-stained fingers, slid a folder across the table with a wary look. "I shouldn't be giving you this yet," he said quietly, "but I owed your institute's director a favor. So, use your time well." The folder contained photocopies of STB documents from 1978 to 1979, reports on cultural activities, surveillance notes about theater rehearsals, cafe meetings, printer purchases. Names jumped out: playwrights, actors, directors, students. And there, on a memo dated March 12, 1979, the name Milan Kolar. Elias's pulse kicked. The memo described a confidential contact assigned to monitor subversive activity in certain Prague theaters. Kolar's reports had led to the preventive detention of several individuals, including one PH, identified only by initials. "PH," Elias murmured. "Pavel Hruby." Another document, partially blacked out, referred to encoded materials, suspected to have been distributed via theatrical texts. Subject PH believed to have prepared a script containing a list of collaborators to be revealed in performance. Measures taken to secure said text and prevent its dissemination. And then a note scribbled in the margin in a different hand. MK insists text destroyed. Unclear if copies remain. Watch Dolezal. Elias stared at the name. M.K. Milan Kolar. Watch Dolezal. He photocopied as much as he could, hands shaking slightly. When he met Clara at his apartment that evening, he spread the pages on the table like a grim tarot. She read silently, her face growing colder. So it's true, she said finally. Kolar was an informant, and Ruby tried to expose him in the play. The STB stopped him. They arrested him, probably killed him, and thought they had destroyed the script. But they knew someone else, Dolezal, might have a copy. And now, Elias said, Dolezal is directing a revival of the Lost play with an actress whose father saw the original and an American professor sniffing around the code. It sounds like the setup of a bad thriller, she said. Except the graffiti on our wall was very real. You should tell Yaroslav about these documents, he said. You should, she countered. He will take it more seriously if it comes from the professor with the magic archive key. I can show him, Elias said. But Claro, this may put you at risk too. If someone is watching the production, if they're worried we'll decode something damaging, then I am already at risk, she said calmly. Welcome to Czech history. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You didn't cause this, Elias. It was here long before you arrived. You just happened to shine a light in the right corner at the wrong time. That's not particularly comforting, he said. Good, she said. Comfort is overrated. They talked late into the night, their bodies and their minds entangled. At some point, she fell asleep with her head on his chest, one hand clutching the edge of a photocopy as if it were a script. He lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the city and to his own heartbeat. For the first time, the word hunted drifted across his thoughts, uninvited. Chapter 7. The break-in came 2 days later. Elias returned to his flat after a day at the library to find his door not quite closed. It was subtle, just a millimeter of extra shadow, but his academic life had trained him to notice margins. He froze, heartbeat pounding in his ears. He was not a man given to dramatics, but he had seen enough notes in STB files about discrete searches to know the script. He pushed the door open cautiously. Inside, nothing looked obviously disturbed. The couch still sagged under the same throw blanket. The kitchen table held the usual clutter of books and coffee mugs. But when he went into the bedroom, he saw that the top drawer of his dresser was slightly askew. He kept nothing of value there, just socks and an old scarf. On his desk, the notebook where he'd been mapping the play's patterns lay open, though he was sure he'd closed it that morning. The photocopies from the archive had been shifted slightly. Someone had turned them, as if skimming. He checked his laptop. It powered on normally. No files seemed missing. Of course, if someone had installed something, he wouldn't know. Cold anger rose in him, cutting through the fear. He called Clara first. Don't go back to your place alone tonight, he said. Come here, or let me come to you. What happened? She demanded. Someone's been in my apartment, he said. It was subtle. They didn't take anything obvious, but they looked at the notebook. There was a pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. He called the landlord next. The man came up frowning, insisted the building door had been locked. He suggested maybe Elias had left his door ajar in the morning. Prague is safe, he said. No one breaks in just to look at papers. Elias did not call the police. He knew rationally that he should, but what would he report? That someone had maybe moved his notes? That he was working on a play that had angered anonymous graffiti artists? The thought of trying to explain the web of history and suspicion to a bored patrolman made his head hurt. When Clara arrived, she brought a small overnight bag and a fierce protectiveness that surprised him. She walked through the rooms, looking with an actor's eye for what was out of place. They didn't want your TV, she said. They wanted your thoughts. She picked up the notebook, flipped through the pages. These patterns, your notes about the acrostic, the references to Kolar, all of this is now in someone else's head. In theory, they already knew more than we do, he said. If they're connected to the old structures, they're afraid we'll confirm something, or make it public. So what's the next move? She asked. We need to involve Yaroslav, he said. He's at the center of this whether he likes it or not. And we need to consider whether decoding the rest of the text is worth the risk. You're thinking about stopping, she said. I'm thinking about you, he said. About the theater. About the fact that no academic article I might write is worth someone getting hurt. She looked at him, something flaring in her eyes. My father didn't get his nose broken so his daughter could decide not to read, she said. The people who wrote this play, who whispered in kitchens, who went to prison for jokes, they didn't do it so we could choose the safe option 30 years later. They also didn't do it so we could become martyrs for a story that might not change anything, he countered. You're wrong, she said quietly. Stories always change something. That's why they were banned. He rubbed his temples. I'm not used to my work having consequences beyond tenure committees. Welcome to the theater, she said. That night, she stayed. They double-checked the locks, drew the curtains, turned off their phones. They made love more urgently than before, as if in defiance of the unseen eyes that might be watching from some metaphorical apartment across the courtyard. Afterward, they lay awake, listening to every creak and distant step in the hallway. In the morning, they walked together to the theater. On the way, they stopped at a small print shop where Elias had a fresh set of his notes printed from a USB drive, notes he had deliberately edited to omit the more sensitive conclusions. He had a second folder in his bag containing the originals. It felt paranoid and theatrical to be carrying decoy documents like a spy. But paranoia, he was learning, was just another word for pattern recognition in a dangerous context. Jaroslav listened to their account of the break-in without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Elias showed him the archive photocopies, the mention of Watch Dolezal, the older man flinched as if struck. I didn't betray him, he said abruptly. I need you to know that. Whatever those files suggest, I survived because I was careful, because I kept my head down, because I pretended not to see things. But I did not hand Ruby to them. Then why did they tell someone to watch you? Elias asked gently. Because I was his assistant, because I spent too much time in smoky rooms with banned poets, because they like to keep everyone afraid of everyone else. He ran a trembling hand over his hair. I remember Kolar, a bland man with good suits. He came to rehearsals, asked friendly questions, always sat in the fourth row on the aisle. We all knew what he was, but we couldn't prove it. Pavel wanted to. He talked about building a trap into the play. I told him to be careful. He laughed. He said, if they are going to kill me, let them at least choke on my words. So he did hide names in the text, Elias said. He hid something, Yaroslav said. He never told me the key. He didn't trust anyone that much. Or maybe he intended to tell me and ran out of time. He looked at them with sudden intensity. Listen to me. If you continue, you must be prepared for the fact that whatever you find will not just be history. Some of the men in those files are dead. Some are old and harmless, but some are still powerful. They own media companies, banks, political parties. They reinvented themselves after '89 and built their fortunes on the bones of their secrets. They will not like being dragged back onto the stage. Then why revive the play at all? Clara demanded. If you are so afraid? He closed his eyes briefly. Because I am tired of pretending I was only an observer. Because I owe Pavel at least one honest production. Because art without risk is propaganda, and I have staged enough polite lies to last a lifetime. He opened his eyes. But I did not anticipate this level of attention. The graffiti, the break-in, Elias said. The anonymous emails. Someone is watching. Let them watch, Yaroslav said suddenly, anger flaring. We go on, we rehearse, we open. If we find something in the text, we decide then what to do with it. We are not the STB. We do not decide in advance what truth people are allowed to see. And if they decide for us, Elias said, then at least we will have forced them to show their faces, Jaroslav replied. Outside, the city went about its day. Trams clanged, tourists bought Tudelnik, office workers checked their phones. Inside the warehouse, under cheap lights and peeling paint, 3 people looked at each other and understood that their lives had veered onto a path none of them had planned. Chapter 8. The surveillance tightened. It was subtle at first. A man lingering too long at the back of the theatre during rehearsals, pretending to check his phone but never actually typing. A black car parked across from Elias's building 2 nights in a row, engine idling. A sense of being watched when they left the cafe, when they crossed the square. Maybe it's just my ex-husband spying for gossip, Clara joked one evening, but the humor fell flat. She had always been attuned to audiences. Now the idea that an invisible one had taken interest made her shoulders tense, her laugh shorter. Elias found that his old habits as a researcher took on a new edge. He noted faces, patterns of movement, the timing of phone calls. He changed his route to the institute, occasionally ducking into side streets to see if anyone followed. Once, on Narodny Trida, he thought he saw the same man from the theatre, dark coat, narrow face, standing by a newspaper kiosk. When Elias slowed, the man turned away. "I don't like this," he told Clara that night. "It's one thing to dig in archives. It's another to feel like I've become a footnote in someone else's file." "Welcome again to Central Europe," she said. "We are all footnotes in someone's file." But he could hear the strain beneath the joke. The code, ironically, began to yield under pressure. Perhaps danger sharpened their focus. Perhaps the act of being watched made them more determined to see. Elias sat with the script late into the night, mapping repetitions, direction cues, line lengths. He tried frequency analysis, mapping unusual word pairings, cross-referencing them with the archive names. One pattern emerged in the stage directions. Whenever a character crossed to the window and looked out, the text specified which street or landmark they were looking toward, even though the set was abstract. The sequence of those landmarks, mapped onto a real map of Prague, traced a path through the city, starting at the National Theatre, moving through Wenceslas Square, up Narodny, across the river, and finally to Letna Park, where a giant statue of Stalin had once stood, replaced after the revolution by a metronome. "A walking tour of trauma," Clara said when he showed her. "What does it spell?" "That's the question," Elias said. "If you plot the initials of each location in the order they appear, you get a string of letters that can be rearranged into several names. One of them is Havelka." "That means nothing to me," she said. "It should," Yaroslav said from the director's chair. He had been listening quietly. "Viktor Havelka, one of the richest men in the country, owns half the private TV channels, a few newspapers, some banks. Likes to talk about supporting culture, donates to theaters, sponsors festivals. He was an officer in the STB before '89, but he claims he was only in administration. His files are missing." "Convenient," Elias muttered. "Very," Jaroslav said. "If Hruby encoded his name in the play alongside Kolar's, it suggests they were connected. Perhaps Havelka was the superior who ordered the crackdown. And now he sponsors theaters," Clara said. "The snake eats its own tail." "He has people everywhere," Jaroslav said. "If someone is paying attention to what we're doing, there's a good chance his network is involved. He likes to manage narratives." "So we are characters in his story now," Elias said. "Not if we write our own," Clara shot back. They argued about what to do. Jaroslav wanted to be cautious. "We can't accuse Havelka publicly without proof," he said. "We'd be sued into oblivion, or worse." "What counts as proof?" Elias asked. "These patterns, the archive hints, they're suggestive but not legally solid." "We need corroboration," Clara said. "Someone who was there, someone who can confirm what the files only hint at." "Most of those someones are dead or conveniently forgetful," Yaroslav said grimly. Then his face changed. "Unless," he stood, pacing. "There was a man, Karel Novotny. He was in the same circle as Pavel, a lighting designer, later a dissident, signed Charter 77. He did some time. After the revolution, he worked at the archives for a while, cataloging STB files. He would have seen everything, if he's still alive." "Do you know where he is?" Elias asked. "Last I heard, he was in Zizkov, working on old stage lights in his garage," Jaroslav said. "Drinks too much, grumbles even more. He refused an award from the Ministry of Culture 10 years ago, called them clowns in new costumes. He might talk, or he might chase you out with a broom." "We should try," Clara said. "If he knows anything about Hruby's code, he might be the missing key." "Fine," Jaroslav said. "But you don't go alone." He looked at Elias. "Professor, you wanted fieldwork. Here it is." Chapter 9. Karel Novotny lived in a narrow house on a street so steep it felt like a test. Zizkov clung to the hillside like a stubborn thought. Its old working-class blocks now mixed with hipster bars and microbreweries. Graffiti bloomed on every blank wall. A hulking television tower loomed above, its strange sculptures of crawling babies making the skyline surreal. They went on a grey afternoon, the air smelling of impending snow. Yaroslav came with them, bundled in an old coat, hat pulled low. "He respects me enough to open the door," he said. "After that, you're on your own." The door opened on the third knock. Carol was in his 70s, hair white and wild, eyes sharp behind smudged glasses. He smelled faintly of oil and tobacco. He squinted at them, then barked a laugh. "Look at this. The ghost of Dolezal, a pretty actress and a foreigner. It's like a joke from 1983. "Hello, Carol," Jaroslav said. "We brought trouble. I hope you have coffee." "I have Slivovitz," Carol said. "If you want coffee, go to a café. Come in." The house was cluttered with old stage equipment, spotlights, cables, metal frames, posters peeled from the walls, advertising productions from decades past. A small kitchen held a table scarred with cigarette burns. Carol poured them clear liquor into small glasses without asking, then sat and lit a cigarette. "So," he said, exhaling, "tell me what idiocy you are up to." Yaroslav explained about the revival of the burning map, about the rumors of a code, the patterns Elias had found, the archive hints about Kolar and Havelka. Carol listened, smoke curling around his head. His expression shifted from amused to grim. "I told Pavel it would get him killed," he said finally. "He said, then at least I die for something I chose. Stubborn bastard." "You knew about the code?" Elias asked. "I guessed," Carol said. "He never told me directly. We were careful about what we said where. But I saw the way he fussed over certain lines, how he insisted on particular repetitions. He asked me once if the lights could flash in a pattern at the end, something the audience would feel without understanding. I told him it would just give someone an epileptic seizure." He laughed. "Do you know what he hid?" Clara asked. "Names," Carol said, "and dates. The network of informants around the theater scene, the officers who ran them. He had access to things most of us didn't. Through a cousin in the ministry, he was furious, said theater should not be staged on a swamp without a map of the quicksand. He wanted to force the censors to either ban the play and reveal their fear, or let it be staged and risk exposure. They chose the first option," Yaroslav said quietly. "Of course," Carol said. "They were evil, not stupid. They arrested him before dress rehearsal. The script disappeared, or so they said." He gave Yaroslav a pointed look. "I suspected you had a copy. You always did like to hoard texts." Yaroslav flushed. "I reconstructed it from memory after '89, he said, "with some notes I had hidden. But I never knew the full code. And now, it seems, someone else remembers it better than we do." He nodded at Elias. "You're not the first to go digging," Carol said to Elias. "After the revolution, everyone wanted to know who'd betrayed them. They lined up at the archives like at a bakery. I watched people open files and realized their best friend had been reporting on them for years. I watched marriages end in the reading room. We thought all that pain would cleanse us. It didn't. It just left scars we don't like to show to foreigners." "I'm not here to gape," Elias said. "I'm here because I think the truth matters, and because whatever Hruby tried to do with his play was unfinished." Carol studied him. "You care about the language?" he asked. "Deeply?" Elias said. "Good," Carol said. "Then maybe you will understand this." He stubbed out his cigarette and stood, shuffling to a bookshelf crammed with binders. From one he pulled a thin folder and brought it back. Inside were photocopies of handwritten notes. "These are from the archive," he said. "I borrowed them years ago. They belong to an STB analyst assigned to Pavel's case. He was trying to decode what he thought was anti-state messaging in the play. He never realized he was looking at something else." Elias scanned the notes. They were written in neat bureaucratic Czech, analyzing word frequencies, noting odd repetitions, underlining phrases like "the door that does not close" and "burn the map." In the margin of one page, the analyst had written, in frustration, "Code suspected, but key missing. Possible acrostic or numerological scheme. Subject PH believes himself clever." "He was clever," Carol said. "More than the analyst. But he also overestimated the system's patience. They didn't need to decode him. They just needed to erase him. Do the notes help? Clara asked. They confirm that there is a code, Elias said, and they narrow the possibilities. If the analyst considered acrostics and dismissed them as incomplete, that suggests there's a second layer, something that overlays the text in another dimension, performance perhaps. He looked up. You mentioned lights. Patterns the audience would feel? Yes, Carol said. He wanted the final monologue to be accompanied by a sequence of blackouts and spots. 3 flashes, pause, 2 flashes, another pause. At the time, I thought it was just theatrical. But afterwards, he shrugged. He got as far as showing me drawings, notes, then they took him. Do you still have those notes? Elias asked, trying not to sound desperate. No, Carol said, but I have something better. He smiled, a grin that made him momentarily look like a younger man. My memory. You don't spend 20 years hanging lights without remembering sequences. Come. He led them into the cluttered back room, where an old control board sat under a dusty tarp. He brushed it off, flicked a few switches. To Elias's surprise, some of the panels lit up. I tinker, Carol said by way of explanation. Old habits. He walked them through the sequence he remembered from Pavel's design, the cues that would have accompanied Hannah's final monologue. Here, he said, pressing buttons. Spot up. 1, 2, 3, blackout, pause. 1, 2, blackout, 1, blackout, 1, 2, 3, 4. Elias counted, heart racing. If we map the lengths and groupings onto letters, 1 equals A, 2 equals B, or more likely, we use a simple substitution based on check letter frequency. His mind raced through possibilities. He grabbed his notebook, scribbling. After some false starts, a pattern shook loose. The sequence, converted using a common cipher keyed to the word mapper, spelled dossier Letna 42-7. Letna, Clara said. The park? And the old party headquarters, Carol said. There were secure archives there. If there was a dossier with that number. The analyst's notes mention a file 42-7, Elias said, flipping back through the photocopies in his mind. We assumed it was an internal reference. But if Pavel encoded dossier Letna 42-7 in the lights, he was pointing to a specific file, which probably contained the list of names, Yaroslav said. And which may or may not still exist, Carol added. After the revolution, there was a lot of shredding, but not everything vanished. Some files were duplicated, misfiled, hidden. The archive is a maze. We have to find it, Clara said. Easy to say, Carol said. Hard to do, especially if powerful men have reasons to keep it buried. We have the reference number, Elias said. The institute director might be able to help, or Marek, if we request it under a research pretext. You will light up alarm bells on some old system, Carol warned. When you pull on that thread, someone on the other end will feel the tug. They already feel it, Clara said. They spray-painted it on our wall. Carol laughed, a short, harsh sound. You have your father's stubbornness, he said to her. Fine, go chase your dossier. Just don't expect it to save you. Truth is heavy. It can crush as easily as it can anchor. Outside, as they walked back down the steep street, Elias felt the story rearranging itself. The play was no longer just a text. It was a map, literally, leading them toward a file that might contain the key to old betrayals. With that map came the knowledge that someone else, somewhere in the city, was tracing their path from the opposite direction. Chapter 10. The first cancellation came wrapped in bureaucratic language. 2 weeks before opening night, the theatre received an official notice from the fire department citing violations of safety regulations and ordering the warehouse closed until further inspection. Petra found the notice taped to the door, flapping in the wind. This is bullshit, she said flatly. We've passed every inspection for years. Nothing has changed. Something has, Jaroslav muttered. We have changed what we're saying. A meeting with the fire inspector yielded only shrugs and vague references to anonymous complaints. Attempts to appeal hit a wall of missing paperwork and postponed appointments. Petra swore at her phone until the battery died. They can't shut us up this easily, one of the actors declared. They can, Jaroslav said. They have. The question is whether we stay shut. The idea of an alternative venue came from Petra. There's an old factory in Holesovis, she said. They rent it out for raves and art happenings. No stage, but plenty of space. If we borrow some lights from Karel and steal enough chairs, we could do a one-night performance. An illegal performance, Yaroslav said. An unsanctioned performance, she corrected. There's a difference. We sell tickets as a closed rehearsal, or we don't sell tickets at all. We invite people who will listen. We film it. We stream it online. If they shut us down afterward, at least the play will exist in the ether. You sound like a revolutionary, Clara said. I'm a stage manager, Petra said. We specialize in making impossible things work with no budget. They argued. Some company members were scared, not without reason. Others were exhilarated by the idea. In the end, the decision came down to a simple vote. The majority chose to proceed. If we are going to poke the bear, Jaroslav said, we might as well choreograph the claw. Elias watched this unfold with a mix of admiration and dread. His academic work had never prepared him for breaking fire codes and planning. Clandestine performances. But the idea of the play being silenced again, of the code remaining hidden, felt unbearable. At the same time, the search for the dossier at Letna stalled. Marek had tried to locate file 42-7 in the archive system, only to find that its entry existed, but the physical file was marked relocated, restricted. Restricted by whom? Elias asked. That's the interesting part, Marek said. The restriction code is old but has been updated recently. Someone with clearance renewed the lock, someone who still cares. Can we get around it? Elias pressed. Marek hesitated. Officially, no. Unofficially, maybe. But it would cost me my job if they found out. And I like my job more than I like being a hero. I'm not asking you to be a hero, Elias said. Just to nudge me in the right direction. Marek sighed. The file might be duplicative, he said. Parts of it could exist under different numbers in other collections. Court documents, surveillance overviews. If you look up cases involving Havelka or Kolar around 1978 to 1979, you might find references. That's still a needle in a haystack, Elias said. Welcome to archive work, Marek said. Also, if I were you, I'd stop saying Havelka's name out loud in this building. As the performance date approached, the sense of being hunted intensified. The black car reappeared outside Elias's building. Clara received a message from an unknown number. You are talented. Don't waste it on dead men's obsessions. When she didn't reply, another came. Some roles are not worth the curtain call. He's trying to scare you, Elias said when she showed him. He's succeeding, she replied. But I'm not cancelling. They kept their phones off more often. They took side streets. They checked over their shoulders. Their intimacy became a refuge and a risk, simultaneously, each night together both a comfort and a reminder of what could be lost. The day of the performance dawned clear and bitterly cold. They spent the morning hauling equipment into the factory space, lights, cables, a makeshift backdrop. Karel barked orders as he rigged the lighting according to the sequence Pavel had designed all those years ago. If we're going to reveal his message, he said, we might as well do it properly. Petra had set up cameras at the back and sides to film. A small team of tech-savvy friends handled the live stream. We'll keep the link private until we start, she said. Then we'll push it out to everyone we know. They can share it further. Once it's online, they can't erase it completely. Tell that to all the deleted tweets, one actor muttered. Tweets are ephemera, Petra said. Theatre is stubborn. They did a run-through in the afternoon. The space was rough, the acoustics unforgiving, but there was a raw energy that the warehouse had never had. Fear thrummed under the lines like an additional character. If someone comes to shut us down, Yaroslav said quietly to the company before they opened the doors, we finish the scene we're in. We do not panic. We remember that this is not 1979. We have phones, cameras, sympathetic journalists. They cannot disappear us as easily. But we also remember that power has many shapes, so we keep our heads. Yes, Papa, Petra said, trying to lighten the mood. The audience that assembled that evening was a mix of ages. Students in scarves, older couples with lines around their eyes that suggested they remembered the first banning, theatre colleagues, a few journalists. Elias sat in the back, heart pounding, notebook forgotten. Clara peeked through a gap in the makeshift curtain, scanning faces. "Do you see him?" Elias whispered. "Who?" she asked. "Anyone who doesn't belong." "In this country, that's a complicated question," she said. "But yes, there." She nodded toward a man near the aisle, his coat too expensive for the setting, his posture too controlled. Another near the wall taking photos with a camera that seemed more professional than journalistic. "Maybe they just love theatre," Elias said. "And maybe I am the Queen of England," she replied. The lights went down. The play began. Chapter 11. Watching the burning map that night, knowing what he knew now about the code and the history, was like hearing a familiar melody with a new accompaniment. The scenes he'd seen a dozen times in rehearsal vibrated with extra resonance. When Hannah talked about burning the map, Elias heard not just metaphor but a specific instruction. When the neighbor joked about friends in high places, the audience laughed, but some faces stayed tight. Clara was incandescent. Her performance felt like a tightrope walk over an invisible chasm. She was not just playing Hannah. She was channeling all the actresses who had never gotten to perform her, all the lives. That had been bent around silences. The final monologue approached like a slow wave. Elias could feel the tension in the room rise with each line. As she stepped into the light for that last speech, Carol's sequence began. The spot hit her face, sharp and white. 3 flashes, blackout, 2 flashes, blackout, 1. The audience shifted, some unsettled, some entranced. They didn't know they were watching a code reveal itself in light and shadow. Hannah spoke of maps burned, of cities reorganizing, of doors that did not close. The words, the lights, the decades layered. Elias felt time fold. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that cameras were capturing this, that the live stream was pushing it out beyond the factory walls, beyond the city. Somewhere, someone at a screen was leaning closer. The final blackout came. Silence. Then applause, massive and immediate, crashing like a wave in the dark. The lights came up slowly, revealing faces wet with tears, mouths open in mid-cheer. The company bowed, breathless. For a moment it felt like victory. Then the side door burst open and the police arrived. They were in plain uniforms, no riot gear, but their presence was a shock. The applause faltered. A man with a badge stepped forward, megaphone in hand, and announced in stern check that the gathering was in violation of safety regulations and had to disperse immediately. Petra stepped toward him, voice steady. "We are in the middle of a performance," she said. "You can wait 5 minutes." "There is a credible threat of fire," the man replied. "The building is not authorized for public assembly." "Convenient," Jaroslav muttered. The audience began to murmur, phones rising. Some filmed, some called out questions. "Why now? Who filed the complaint? Is this about the play?" The officer insisted it was a routine safety matter. His eyes, however, kept flicking toward the cameras. He knew he was on film. He did not like it. In the chaos, Elias felt a hand clamp onto his arm. He turned to see the man from the aisle seat, the one with the expensive coat, leaning close. "Professor Mercer," the man said in smooth English. "A word, perhaps?" "I don't think we've met," Elias said. "Oh, but I know you," the man said. "Your research is very interesting, as is your choice of companions." He glanced subtly toward the stage where Clara stood with the cast, watching the police. "Who are you?" Elias asked. "A concerned citizen," the man said. "Concerned that certain old narratives remain where they belong. In the past." His smile did not reach his eyes. "You're playing with matters you don't fully understand." "That's what research is," Elias said, forcing his voice not to shake. "There is research, and there is provocation," the man replied. "You have now crossed that line. My employer does not appreciate such choices." "Your employer?" Elias repeated. "Would that be Mr. Havelka?" The man's smile widened. "Names are a dangerous habit, Professor. You might consider using fewer of them." "Are you threatening me?" Elias asked. "Not at all," the man said, "merely advising caution for your sake and for hers." His gaze flicked back to Clara. The implication was clear. Elias felt the old academic instinct. To step back, to detach, to retreat into analysis, war with something fiercer he'd not known he possessed. "If you harm her," he said quietly, "or anyone in that company, the story will not stay hidden. It will spread faster than you can control." "Maybe," the man said, "or maybe it will drown in the next scandal about a politician's mistress. Attention is a fickle thing. But harm, such a dramatic word. You people in the arts always think in extremes." He patted Elias's arm as if they were old friends. "We will be in touch." He slipped away into the dispersing crowd. On stage, the situation escalated. The police insisted the building be cleared. Jaroslav tried to reason, Petra argued. The audience booed. Eventually, under pressure, people began to file out, anger and fear mixed on their faces. Some shouted slogans about censorship, others muttered that it was just like the old times. Outside, under the cold stars, journalists pounced with questions. "Do you think the shutdown was political? Are you being censored? What was the meaning of the light sequence at the end?" "Ask the fire inspector," Jaroslav said bitterly. "Ask whoever owns the inspectors," Petra added. "Ask yourself why you're asking us and not them," Clara said, exhaustion sharpening her voice. They regrouped in a side room, shaking. The adrenaline crash was hard. Carol paced, muttering curses. "They're clumsy," he said. "If they wanted to scare you, they should have sent a bomb threat. This is just a bad echo." "The live stream?" Elias asked Petra. "Still up?" she said. "We got cut off at the end, but most of it went out. People are sharing clips. The shutdown is trending." "Trending," Jaroslav repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. "Our revolution will be hashtagged." "Better than silenced," Clara said. Elias told them about the man who had approached him, about the mention of an employer. "Havelka," Jaroslav said. "It has to be. He has his fingers in the police, in the fire department, in the media. He doesn't like narratives he can't control." "Then we've just given him a new one to worry about," Petra said. "The more he pushes, the more people will notice." "Unless they're too busy watching reality shows on his network," Carol grumbled. "Cynicism is easy," Clara said sharply. "We did the play, people saw it, we decoded part of the message. That's more than anyone has done in decades." "And now what?" Elias asked. "We still don't have the dossier. We have circumstantial evidence, a half-decoded code, and a billionaire's annoyance. Now," Yaroslav said, "we go home, we sleep, and tomorrow we decide whether we want to keep being hunted or turn around and hunt back." Chapter 12. The decision came in fragments, like a mosaic. Overnight, clips from the performance and the shutdown spread online. Someone had captured the police entering, the announcement, the audience's reaction. Commentary sprouted, some outraged by censorship, others mocking the theatre folk for their paranoia, some just delighted by the drama. A few commenters, more informed, tied it to Havelka's name, to rumors about his past. An old photo of him in uniform resurfaced, though his defenders insisted it was standard military service. A small independent news site ran an article about the burning map, its history, and the whispers of a hidden code. They quoted an anonymous academic source about the possible existence of a dossier at Letna. Elias recognized his own words, lightly paraphrased. Marek, perhaps, or someone who'd overheard in a café. "So much for secrecy," he muttered. "Secrecy is a luxury we lost the moment we switched on the cameras," Petra said. "But now we have something else. Witnesses." The Institute's director called Elias in. A serious man with gentle eyes, he sat behind his desk and steepled his fingers. "You're causing quite a stir, Elias," he said. "Not the quiet sabbatical we had imagined for you." "I didn't intend to cause trouble," Elias said. "I just followed the language where it led." "Language has always led to trouble in this country," the director said. "Sometimes to prisons, sometimes to revolutions." He sighed. "I've received a discreet inquiry from a government liaison. They're curious about your research, particularly any suggestions that certain figures might have been more involved with the STB than they have publicly admitted." "Are they asking me to stop?" Elias asked. "They are asking for responsibility," the director said, "which is a word with many meanings. I told them that our institute does not censor scholarship, but I also have to think about funding, about the jobs of my staff. We walk a tightrope. Do you want me to walk away? Elias asked quietly. The director looked at him for a long moment. Personally, he said, I am proud that our guest scholar has shaken something loose. Professionally, I must advise caution. If you continue, you may find doors closing, grants evaporating. The state has subtle ways of disciplining those who poke at old wounds. I understand, Elias said. Do you? The director asked. You can get on a plane and go home. We stay here. We live with the consequences. The words hit hard. Elias had been so focused on his own fear and desire that he had not fully reckoned with his privilege of escape. I don't want to drag anyone into danger, he said. Too late, the director said gently. But danger was already here. You have merely turned the light. The question is, what do you wish to do with what you have illuminated? That night, he and Clara sat on his couch, the city muffled by snow outside. They were tired, wired, their bodies seated close but not touching yet. I can leave, he said abruptly. At the end of the semester. Sooner, even. If my presence is making things worse, if Havelka's people are more focused because of the foreign professor angle— Stop, she said. Listen to yourself. If my presence is making things worse. As if you summoned the STB from the grave. I didn't, he said, but my curiosity poked at a scab. The scab was already being poked, she said. We were planning this revival before you arrived. We were gossiping about codes, about names. Your work gave us structure, yes. It gave us a way to decode, a way to point. But the choice to go on stage, to perform, that was ours. Mine. Don't rob me of my agency by taking all the blame. You might be hurt, he said, because of me. I might be hurt because I live in a country that never fully dealt with its past, she shot back. Because men like Havelka turned their power into money and influence instead of facing consequences. Because people prefer comfort to truth. You are not the origin of that. He looked at her, the lines of her face thrown into soft shadow by the lamp. What do you want to do? He asked. She was quiet for a long time. Part of me wants to stop, she admitted. To let the play be a play, to move on to the next project, to go back to worrying about my agent and my rent instead of whether someone is reading my texts. Part of me wants to take your hand and buy tickets to somewhere warm and anonymous. To pretend Prague is just a pretty postcard. But the part of me that walked with my father in Wenceslas Square, that heard the keys and the chanting and felt something loosen in the air, that part refuses. If we have the means to expose even a fraction of what Ruby tried to encode, how can I look at myself if I choose silence? Then we continue, he said. We continue, she agreed. They decided on a plan. They would publish their findings carefully, responsibly, in a joint piece. Elias as academic, Yaroslav as dramaturg, Petra handling the online dissemination. They would focus on the code itself, on the historical dynamics, without making direct accusations that could be easily sued. They would share the decoded message, the reference to dossier 42-7, the patterns pointing to names like Kolar and Havelka, framed as questions. They would challenge the government to open the restricted file publicly. We forced them to respond, Petra said when they met at the cafe. If they refuse to release it, they look like they're hiding something. If they release it, we see what's inside. Either way, we move the narrative into the open. Havelka will not like being named, even obliquely, Yaroslav warned. He already doesn't like us, Clara said. At least this way we choose the terms. The article, once written, was long and dense, but Petra insisted on a more accessible version for the website. We need people to actually read it, not just pretend, she said. They included diagrams of the code, clips from the performance, quotes from archives. They were careful to label their conclusions as interpretations, not legal claims. They ended with a call. If we are serious about reckoning with our past, we must be willing to open all the doors, even those that lead to uncomfortable rooms. We invite the relevant authorities to release dossier 42-7 and allow the public to judge. The piece went live on a Monday morning. By noon, it had been shared thousands of times. Academic circles buzzed. Theatre blogs analyzed the staging. Social media lit up with arguments, some applauding the courage, some accusing them of witch hunts, some insisting that we have more important problems now than decades-old secrets. By Tuesday, A spokesperson for the Ministry of Interior announced that they were reviewing the matter, and that any surviving documents relevant to the public interest will be handled according to legal procedures. It was bureaucratic non-speak, but it was more than silence. By Wednesday, a lawsuit arrived. It came in a thick envelope addressed to the theatre, bearing the logo of a high-powered law firm. Victor Havelka was suing for defamation, claiming that the article had irreparably harmed his reputation by implying he had engaged in criminal activity. "He's fast," Petra said, flipping through the pages. "He must have had this template ready." "It's a message," Yaroslav said. "Back off, or I drag you through court for years." "Can he win?" Elias asked. "That depends on the judges," Petra said, "and on how much more we uncover. And on whether dossier 42-7 sees daylight," Clara added. That evening, as snow fell thicker outside, Elias received an email from an anonymous address. "If you want the truth about 42-7, meet me at Letna by the metronome tomorrow at 1900 hours. Come alone." He stared at it, heart hammering. "You're not going alone," Clara said when he showed her. "The email says," he began. "I don't care what it says," she cut him off. "If this is a trap, they're not going to get you without a fight." "I'm not a fighter," he said. "I am," she said, "at least on stage." "This isn't on stage," he said. "Everything is on stage now," she replied. Chapter 13, Letna Park at night, was a liminal space. The metronome ticked above the city, its red arm swinging slowly where Stalin's statue had once glowered. Below, the river glinted with reflected lights, the bridges stringing the two halves of Prague together like a necklace. The air was sharp. With cold, the snow underfoot a thin crust. They arrived together, bundled in coats, hats pulled down. Elias had insisted they tell Petra and Yaroslav where they were going. Petra had threatened to call the police if they didn't check in. "Even suspicious police are better than no witnesses if something happens," she'd said. "Maybe no one will show up," Elias said as they approached the metronome. "Maybe this is a bad spy movie," Clara said. "We at least deserve good dialogue." A figure stood near the railing, silhouetted against the city's glow. As they drew closer, Elias saw that it was Marek, the archivist, his face drawn and nervous. "You brought someone," Marek said, eyeing Clara. "Did you expect me to walk into a dark park alone?" Elias said. "I'm a linguist, not an idiot." Marek huffed what might have been a laugh. "Fair enough," he said. "I almost didn't send the email. I almost deleted it. But then I thought of my grandfather, who spent 3 years in prison for making jokes about the party, and I couldn't." "You have the file," Elias said. "I have a copy," Marek said. "The original is complicated. It exists, but its custody has been manipulated. When your article went live, certain people came to the archive. They wanted to make sure dossier 42-7 was still where it was supposed to be. I watched them. I realized that if I didn't act then, I might never have another chance." He pulled a thin envelope from inside his coat, hands shaking. "This is not the whole thing," he said, "but it's enough. Reports, signatures, orders, names. You could be fired for this," Elias said softly. "I could be worse than fired," Marek said. "But I'm tired of being careful. I became an archivist because I believed in preserving truth, not burying it on command." He looked at Clara. "Your performance, my wife watched it. She cried. She told me, if people like that are willing to risk something, what are you doing hiding behind shelves?" He shrugged. "So here I am." Elias took the envelope with something like awe. Inside, pages rustled. Photocopies of typed reports, signatures of officers, including one clearly labeled Victor Havelka, orders for surveillance, for detentions. A list of informants around the National Theatre, among them Milan Kolar, confidential contact, codename Horizon. Another memo described the decision to arrest subject PH, Ruby, to prevent the staging of a play that threatens to expose state security collaborators via coded performance. "This is it," Elias breathed. "This is what he tried to tell the world." "And what they killed him for," Clara said quietly. "You have to be careful with this," Marek said urgently. "If you release it all at once, they'll say it's fake, or stolen, or taken out of context. They'll try to discredit you, to discredit the archive. But if you work with reputable journalists, with historians, if you build the case slowly, we can corroborate, cross-check, Elias said, mind already racing. We can show the chain from the code in the play to the orders in the file. We can show that Havelka lied about his role, Clara said. We can show that the past is not past, Marek said. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we can force some accountability. A noise behind them made them all start, footsteps on snow. They turned to see two figures approaching, men in dark coats, faces partially obscured by scarves. Adrenaline surged. "Run!" Marek hissed. They turned and bolted down the path, snow crunching under their boots. The metronome ticked overhead, indifferent. Elias clutched the envelope inside his coat, heart pounding. He was not athletic, his lungs burned quickly. He heard the footsteps gaining. "This way!" Clara gasped, veering down a side trail toward a stand of trees. They slipped, slid, nearly fell. A shout behind them. "Stop!" They didn't. The park blurred. Trees, snow, flashes of city light through branches. Elias's foot caught on a root. He pitched forward, hit the ground hard. The envelope slid out, skidding. One of the men lunged, hand outstretched. Clara stepped between them and kicked. It was not elegant, but it connected, her boot hitting the man's knee. He yelped, stumbling. "Run!" she shouted at Elias. He scrambled, snatching the envelope. The second man closed in, grabbing his arm. Pain shot up as the grip tightened. For a frozen second, their eyes locked. The man's were flat, professional. "Give it," he said in Czech. "No," Elias said, surprising himself. A voice rang out, "Police, stop!" Flashing lights cut through the trees. Several uniformed officers stormed up the path from below, breath steaming. "Hands up!" one shouted. The two men hesitated, then turned and melted into the darkness, moving with practiced ease. "You called them!" Elias gasped too. Clara, as they raised their hands for the officers. "Petra did," she said, panting. "We said we'd check in by 8. When we didn't, she sent them our location. Stage managers are control freaks." The police were suspicious at first, 3 people running in the park at night, talk of mysterious men and stolen documents. But Marek's ID as an archivist, combined with Petra's frantic explanation over the phone and the undercurrent of politics, made them tread carefully. They took statements, promised to look into it, and advised them to be discreet. "They won't find those two," Marek said later as they sat in a café, hands wrapped around hot mugs. "Men like that don't exist in databases." "But they know now that we have something," Elias said. "They knew before," Clara said. "That's why they came." They decided unanimously that the envelope could not stay with any one of them. They made copies, encrypted digital scans, stored them in multiple locations. They gave a set to a trusted investigative journalist known for digging into corruption. They retained enough to continue their own analysis. The lawsuit from Havelka remained, a sword hanging over them. But now they had a shield, not perfect, not impenetrable, but substantial. In the weeks that followed, the story grew. The journalist published a series of articles, carefully sourced, laying out Havelka's past step by step, using the dossier, the play's code, and testimonies from surviving witnesses. Protests formed outside Havelka's media headquarters, small at first, then larger. Investors began to ask questions. Politicians who had happily stood next to him at galas suddenly found other stages. Havelka, for his part, went on television to denounce smears, to position himself as a victim of a witch hunt by radical elements. He insisted he had only ever done administrative work for the state, that he had never knowingly harmed anyone. But the documents showed his signature on orders for detentions, for interrogations. The gap between his words and the text in the files became a fissure too wide to ignore. The lawsuit against the theatre quietly stalled. No judge seemed eager to take it on. Eventually it was postponed pending further review. The police never officially acknowledged the men in the park. The break-in at Elias's apartment remained an unsubstantiated claim. The graffiti on the theatre wall washed away, but the sense of being hunted eased, replaced by something else. Exposure. They were no longer prey in the dark, they were figures on a lit stage. The burning map was restaged months later at a different venue, this time legally with fire exits checked, and inspectors oddly cooperative. The audience was larger, more diverse. Some came for the art, some for the scandal, some out of curiosity about the coded play that brought down a mogul, as one tabloid breathlessly put it. The performance was different now. It carried the knowledge of what had happened in its bones. When the lights flashed in Carol's sequence, people in the audience nodded, aware. The metronome still ticked in Letna, but its rhythm had a new echo. After the curtain call, as the applause rolled, Yaroslav stepped forward and spoke briefly. He thanked the audience, the company, the journalists, even the archivists. He dedicated the performance to Pavel Hruby, to all those who had risked words when words were dangerous. And then he did something unexpected. He named his own fear. He admitted publicly that in the past he had kept his head down, looked away, accepted half-truths to survive. He said that directing this play had been his way of finally looking straight at the stage of his own compromises. It was a small speech, but it mattered. In the days after, people spoke of it almost as much as of the code. The idea that one could be both complicit and redeemable resonated in a country still negotiating its reckoning. As for Elias and Clara, their story did not end in a neat fade out. Relationships, they discovered, were more complex than conspiracies. They argued about his eventual return to the States, about her reluctance to leave Prague, about the way his work sometimes consumed him, about her tendency to wear her wounds as armor. They laughed about the absurdity of having their affair dissected by a gossip column that called him the sexy American professor and her the brave actress with a past. They navigated the strange space between private tenderness and public narrative. At the end of his official sabbatical, Elias was offered a choice: return to his tenured position as planned, or extend his stay in Prague under a joint appointment, helping to build a new program on memory studies and cultural reckoning. The dean back home warned him that stepping away longer could slow his career trajectory. His friends reminded him of stability, of retirement plans. He stood on the bridge, the smaller one, not Charles, where they had first kissed, the river moving steadily below. Snow fell in soft flakes, catching in his hair. Clara stood beside him, her breath visible. "So," she said, "what do you want?" He looked at her, at the city, at the place where language had become not just his profession, but his fate. He thought of the dossiers, the metronome, the theater, the nights awake mapping patterns, the mornings with her feet cold against his. He thought of the way the city had reorganized itself around the ashes of its burned maps, and how he had reorganized himself around the lines of a play and the curve of a woman's laughter. "I want to stay," he said, "if you want me to." She smiled, slow and genuine. "I want you to stay because you want to," she said, "not because you're afraid to leave." "I'm afraid either way," he admitted, "but at least here I'm afraid of something worth the fear." "Good," she said. "Fear should be picky." They walked on, their steps leaving tracks that would soon be covered by new snow. The past did not disappear. The people who had hunted them did not vanish into convenient justice. Some of them faded, some regrouped, some persisted in other forms. The city remained complicated, haunted, beautiful. The play continued to be performed in Prague and beyond, translated into languages that bent around its Czech cadences. The code became a story told in seminars and bars, a case study in how art can carry truth across decades. Students wrote theses about it. Journalists used it as a metaphor for every new scandal. The words "burn the map" entered the lexicon of protest. In quiet moments, in their apartment with the temperamental radiator, Elias and Clara built something that was neither entirely safe nor entirely doomed. They learned each other's languages more deeply, his English with its directness, her Czech with its layers of irony. They fought, they made up, they grew. The affair that had begun as a spark on a bridge became, if not a calm flame, then at least a sustainable fire, tended carefully. And somewhere, in a drawer at the Institute, a folder labeled 42-7 sat with a small note attached in Marek's handwriting. Accessed, not forgotten.